Good morning. How is everybody this morning? Good morning. Welcome to our first breakfast club of 2022. We are going to chat a moment today about presser foot number 18. Let me grab a hold of it. So this is foot number 18 with Bernina. This is our button sew-on foot. So we're going to talk about how to do that technique, plus other things that this foot can help you with and capable of. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Hope you're all sitting in your PJs, having some breakfast, some coffee, some tea. And we're going to get started here. All right, so let me get the right camera. Good morning, Miss Kathy. Okay, so like I said, we are going to talk about foot number 18. That is our button sew-on foot. So I want to talk a little bit about the parts of a button sew-on foot. Depending upon how old your button sew-on foot is, will depend upon what it looks like. The newer button sew-on feet have these two little black rubber pads on the outside that are designed to hold the button. But you may also have a button sew-on foot that looks the same, except the two rubber pads are not there. Okay? Both feet operate exactly the same. Okay? It's nothing necessary. One doesn't do a better job than the other, but I will show you if you really want a foot with a rubber pad. You can get one. It is the accessory of the month this month. It is 25% off with Bernina. And what you can do with your old number 18 foot. Now, the button sew-on foot is designed for buttons. Okay? There are those two left and right pieces, and then there's a middle shank. Okay? So the outside edges are designed to sit on the button, okay? And that middle toe is designed to sit right between the two holes of the button, okay? So think of this as the little finger that the stitch is built across. You can make that stitch finger is adjustable, okay? There is a button on the side of the foot that when loosened, you can raise and lower that middle toe, okay? And you can then tighten it. So this will allow you to adjust the shank of the button. So that meaning you can adjust how tight or loose that button sits on the fabric. So if you were going to be stitching buttons on a wool coat, you would want that button to have a higher shank because you want it to sit more off the fabric so that when you add or button over your other piece of wool, it will sit flush underneath of it. So we add a little bit of a thread shank so that you can do that. Back in the day, before we had button sew-on feet and you did this by hand, okay, you would use like toothpicks. And so you would take a toothpick and you would lay it between the eyes, and then you would stitch over the toothpick and then pull that out, and that would create additional shank to your button. Okay, so we're going to look at the stitch or stitches that you could use to sew on your buttons. Okay, so let's pull up a simulator here so you can see your machine. Now, this is not a new stitch. I mean, I have a machine that's 18 years old, and this stitch is on the machine. It is the same icon, pretty much even older than my 18-year-old machine. The button sew-on stitch for newer touchscreen machines, you're going to find that under your buttonhole menu. Okay, so if you click your buttonhole menu, it is going to be stitch number 60, and that's pretty much the same stitch number on almost all machines. Now you may be looking at this and being like 59 and then 63. Well, where is stitch number 60? If you go to the end of the buttonhole menu, you will find your button sew on program, and then we have two eyelets. And they put that at the end because they've grouped all the buttonholes together and then put the complementary stitches that you would use with your buttonholes at the end. And so stitch number 60 is what we would use for this technique. Now, if you don't have a button sew on stitch, you can very easily use the Zigzag Stitch, okay, that's built into your machine, okay, the stitch that, you know, we all have a zigzag stitch, that's not a problem. But what's nice about jumping to your button sew on stitch, if you have it, is that it automatically deactivates your feed dogs. So you don't have to lower your feed dogs when you go to sew buttons on, because you don't want it to move, right? You need it to stay in place so that you can stitch in the hole and then jump to the other hole. And so by using your button sew on program, the machine says, okay, I'm gonna stitch, but I don't need to use the feed dogs. And so we can do that without needing to lower the feed dogs. If you are going to use the zigzag stitch, we need to lower the feed dogs before we start stitching, because otherwise the button is going to move on us, okay? The other thing that is nice about the button sew on program is it's automatically ties on and ties off the stitch. And so every other jump it ties a knot, so you get a nice secure stitch for your buttons, okay, so that we can hopefully keep them attached. A couple of things that I do when I sew buttons onto garments and things like that, I will either use a polyester thread, or I will use a heavier weight cotton if I'm using cotton thread for my project. I just want to make sure that, you know, that button is going to take a lot of wear and tear, and you know, it's going to be holding against fabric, keeping things shut, and it helps keep them from coming off and breaking and things along that lines. I usually go with a thicker thread or a polyester. Okay, now, so I'm going to choose stitch number 60 on my machine. I'm also going to, if you have the newer 790, 880s, and the 770 pluses, 590s, all those machines that want to know exactly what presser foot we have on the machine, you want to go ahead and select foot number 18, so that the machine is aware of the foot we have on and aware of the stitch that we're going to be using. If you don't have foot number 18, you could easily do this with your number 1 foot, although it's going to be hard to be able to see the holes, so your number 20 or maybe a clear foot would work as well. If you come in to the presser foot recommendation or requirement box, they're also suggesting foot number 9, number 15, which are your free motion feet. They have an opening to them so that you can see where the holes are, and then 34 is a clear option. So those are some other options that you can use if you don't have a button sew on foot. Okay, let's come on over to the machine. All right, let me put a foot on. adjust the shank. All the way down is going to be good for like hooks and eyes. If you kind of come medium, that's going to be really good for shirts and blouses with lightweight fabric. And then you want to go all the way high, all the way up if you are working on coats, jackets, things along that lines. If you are sewing buttons onto a lightweight fabric, you may want to consider sliding a piece of stabilizer behind just to provide some additional support, or ironing a piece of stabilizer. So for my machine embroiderers, this is another place to use your scraps of tearaway for the project. It's hard to see, but this is a 2-hole button. You can do 4-hole buttons, and I will do one here in a moment for you. I'm going to position this on my fabric. If the button likes to slide or anything like that, or you're like, okay, I'm gonna get my buttons positioned over here, and then getting to the machine, things want to move on you, you could take a little good old washable glue, and I would, put a little washable glue on the edge of my button and stick it in place. Now, when you choose stitch number 60, it automatically comes up with a default stitch width, and you may not know the distance between holes on commercially made buttons are the same distance, no matter the size button. So you can see that the distance between these 2 holes is pretty much the same distance as it is between these 2 holes. If I can hold a button today. Let me see. And so on. So the default settings on the program are designed for that default size, but we always want to make sure that 1, we've got our button straight, and 2, that the default size is really correct for our buttons, especially if you are working with handmade buttons. Okay, you want to just verify. Your freehand system is really good for this technique, because you can use that to raise and lower your foot as you keep your hands on your project. So I've got the middle finger here between the 2 holes of our project. I'm going to lower my needle so that the needle goes into the hole on the left hand side of the button. Okay, I'm going to turn my hand wheel a few times until it jumps to the other hole. When it jumps to the other hole and stitches the other hole, clears the hole so that it doesn't hit the button, then I know that this setting is correct. If I need to make adjustments, we would either increase or decrease stitch width. Okay, because remember, we want to adjust how wide the stitch jumps. Once I've cleared both holes and I know that I'm not going to hit any button or break any needles, you can step on the gas. Keep your foot on the gas until the machine stops. It's going to tie that knot and then stop. Raise the foot, slide the button and the fabric towards you, and you can take your item off. You can use the automatic thread cutter on the machine. I don't know, I'm cautious about using it, but it's just fine. Because my item is technically knotted, I can just cut these thread tails. If you wanted to, you could pull them to the back side. I'm not going to, so I'm just gonna cut them flush in my bobbin. That's what it looks like, and I can cut those tails as well, and then my button is attached. Okay, ready to be used on my project. If you are going to do a 4-hole button, 4-hole buttons, you're going to do the front 2 holes first. Okay, slide the button forward and then do the back 2 holes. Okay, so just so you can see, so I'm going to turn my hand wheel just to clear, and then I'm going to step on the gas. cut my thread if I want, or you can leave it connected as you pull to the next set of holes. I'm gonna pull my foot out towards me, get back to the next 2 set of holes, double check that I'm not crooked, I'm lined correctly. If you need to, you can rotate or fiddle with the position of your button, and then step on the gas. Cut my thread, raise my foot, and pull my fabric towards me. And let me change cameras. And now you've got a 2-hole button and a 4-hole button attached. And I didn't have to thread the eye of a hand sewing needle. Isn't that a lovely thing? Cut my thread tails. There it is. Nobody said that you had to sew the buttons left to right. You could rotate your button and you could sew the holes diagonally. Okay, you will have to probably adjust the width of your stitch in order to do that. Okay, so just so you can see, you could, nobody says the buttons have to be sewn in a standard pattern. Okay, you could do different items diagonally, just your standard 4 square. So completely up to you. Now, the other thing that you can do with this is also hooks and eyes. So those same little hooks and eyes, okay, that you would normally sew on a garment, the same concept. With the hook portion like this one, I would set it up and stitch between those 2 holes. On this one, I would set it up so that my toe was here. One side of the jump would jump into the hole and one side would jump to the outside. Okay, and so that would tack it on. That same technique is what you would do to sew on charms. Okay, so you could sew on charms, things along that lines. The other thing that you can use this for is sewing on crystals. And so you may be like, crystals? So we have, okay, so for example, let me get this out. These are the crystals that come with the Crystal Edition 790 or 880, the Swarovski crystals. These crystals have holes in them. It's hard to see, but there is a hole there. And again, we would place them down, set this up, and stitch in the hole and to the outside of the crystal and jump back and forth until they were attached. I would repeat on each corner, and that would then be attached. Okay, so that's how you sew on crystals. The other thing that you can do is tack ribbon. Okay, so I will, let's think, tying a quilt. You could totally do snaps, Miss Kathy. If they were the sew-on snaps, yes, you could do this with snaps. Not a problem. I went hunting for snaps this morning, and the only thing I had were purse snaps, which are not hand sewn on. But yes, I should have grabbed my raincoat, because my raincoat has sew-on snaps, and they were done by sewing machine. Yeah, if I don't have to, I don't hand sew them on. So yes, you can do the sew-on snaps. So bar tacking a quilt, tying a quilt. So normally what you would do when you would go to tie a quilt, right? We would layer everything together, and then we would sit at an intersection and stitch with floss or yarn through the top into the back so that everything stays together. And you would do, again, doing it by hand, which is just fine. But sometimes I personally don't like the look of a tie quilt. I don't like that, I don't know. I just don't like those yarn, that floss, those little bows or knots that are in every intersection. It's just not my thing. but I don't always want to quilt an entire quilt either. So this little project here, this little cuddle ruffle blanket is just done with squares, is bar tacked at every intersection, and you can't see it. It's very hard for you to see. I'll change. Yes, can we still get this foot? Yes, it is out of stock. I am waiting for a shipment to arrive probably the beginning of next week. If you call or text the store, we'll put you on the reserve list and you will get it. Okay, so we're just waiting for some more to arrive. I had expected that shipment to come, but it did not come yet. Okay, so just so, let's see, change cameras here. You can see there is a little tiny bar tack right there. Okay, that is the button sew-on program with no buttons, okay, in its place. Okay, so give me 1 second here. One second, let me find. All right, thank you, Gina. Okay. Now, so bar tacking without any button, okay, and you can also do this with ribbon. So if you do like the concept of those little bows in the corners, or you're doing it to embellish something, basically what you can do is, we don't need that middle finger, right? We don't need a shank. So let me try to do this without my hands being in the camera. You can actually remove the screw, flip the middle toe up out of the way, and reinsert the screw in the back of the foot. And you want to make sure this is tight, okay? So you can see that that middle toe is now up, it's locked in place, and I have nothing in the middle, okay? I actually have one where I completely removed the middle toe. If I'm sewing things down for a craft purpose, I don't want it to have any give to it whatsoever, I will use this foot. So for those of you that have an older foot and you want to replace it with one that has the rubber pad, because I can't get rubber pads by themselves, this is what I would do if you want to use one as a bar tack foot, is take that middle shank off the foot, and now this is my bar tack foot, and then I have one for sewing on buttons. This will work on all Berninas, no matter, you just need one foot, will work on all of them, okay? So I would come to the intersection of my fabric. You can place a ribbon down if you want, and I'm just gonna step on the gas. Okay, and then I can cut my thread. I can move to the next intersection, step on the gas, cut my thread. Okay, it's gonna give you that little bar tack right there in the middle. There's no give to it whatsoever. Here, and then you can, I may not have left myself enough on one section, but you could then tie a bow. Okay? So that is, you know, you can fake, if you want to call it, you can fake tying a quilt, use your thread and your machine, lace some ribbon, and then go back and tie the bows. Plus, as it gets washed, you know, especially for little people, they pull things on and off. and fiddle with it. This has a little bit more durability to it. It's easier to retie the bows, especially for garments. For all of my Kimberbell gals, you know, especially because I was thinking the Valentine bench pillow has all these bows tied to it with ribbon. They were all tacked on, at least on my pillow, they were all tacked on by the machine, and then I tied my bow. Okay, I normally use thinner ribbon, but this was all I could get my hands on this morning in the store. So that is, there we go. It looks a little better now. And even if you wanted to pre-tie your bow, first, so for example, let me cut that. So let's say you wanted to pre-tie bows, because you don't want to have to tie these bows constantly on your child's garment, grandchild's garment, anything along that lines. Okay, so if I pre-tied my bow, okay, then we could go to the machine, lay down your pre-tied bow, and run your bar tack right through the middle of the bow. Okay, that's going to keep the bow tied, and you're not going to have to worry about constantly tying the bow. It's attached. It's not going to come untied. Okay, can't pulling on that. It's not coming untied, and then your bow's attached. Okay, so if you do this with a zigzag stitch, again, remember that we need to drop our feed dogs, open up your zigzag stitch. So let me pull up the simulator here. Okay, so if we were going to do a zigzag, we would need to open up the zigzag stitch, and then we're going to need to adjust the stitch width. Okay, and the default setting on a button sew-on program starts at a 4, and then you also want to make sure that your feed dogs are down. Okay, it's going to look like a zigzag stitch. It's not going to move because you've lowered the feed dogs, but I would definitely lower the hand wheel, make sure it jumps and clears the other hole, and then you are good to step on the gas. Now, if you're also using that zigzag stitch, the machine's not going to stop automatically. It's not pre-programmed. It doesn't know it's technically doing a button. Okay? Correct. Yeah. And so I usually, if I'm going to do that, I will count, like, let it jump maybe 5 or 6 times, just depending upon how the project is going to be used. Okay, it doesn't just know that if you opt for a zigzag, the machine is not going to stop on its own. And there's nothing wrong with running the button sew-on program again. If you want to make sure that it's really secure, once it's stopped, just take your foot off the gas and step on the pedal again, and it will run it again. And then you just made sure it's really secure. Especially for me, like I usually do that on a coat. Something that is going to, you know, not have a lot of pull, but could, thank you, Gina, I will tell you, not have a lot of pull to it, so that it's just got a little bit more to hold on to. Because if you think about it, when you button over a coat, really what's ultimately holding that fabric in place is that thread shank. Okay, it's not the button. Okay, it's the thread shank that we've created, and that's the button is holding the thread shank, and the fabric is up against that. So I will usually, if it's going to get a button that's got a lot of wear and tear, I usually run the button sew-on program twice. If you are using a button sew-on, a zigzag stitch, tying on and tying off would be using your knot function on the machine. So if you have programmed on your machine, so you may not know, but you have the ability on the newer machines to program what your scissors do, okay? You also have this this tie-on program that is activated so that when you start stowing, the machine automatically stitches it in place. Some of you may have this turned off. I know it is turned off on my machine. I don't like it. I don't care for it when I'm piecing. So if I'm going to use the button sew on program, not use the button sew on program, you want to take a few stitches in place. This is automatically going to do it. And then in your scissor function, I would program the machine to tie a knot when you cut the scissors. And you want to make sure it is this first option of knot that you have turned on, because we want it to stitch the knot in place, not in a line, because we have our feed dogs down, so it's really not going to do anything. Okay? Now, if you don't have one of these newer machines that kind of lets you make these sort of adjustments, what I would do before I start, my stitch length, my stitch width here, let's see. You could create a really, most everybody has a knot button on their machine. I'm trying to think of a way. It would require you to kind of set up your straight stitch with your needle position moved over so that it clears a hole. Okay? Then you would take your stitch length down to almost nothing, well, to nothing. And so ultimately what's going to happen is the machine is going to stitch in place. You will do that for like a count of 3. Go to your zigzag, sew your button on, and then come back to stitch number 1, which will still be set up thanks to temporary altered memory, to sew that stitch in place. And that is what you can use as your tie on and tie off if you have an older machine that doesn't do it automatically for you. Okay, I hope that makes sense. But that's what I would use if I was on an old 1130, although that may have a button sew on program. Maybe a 930 or an old 830, using the zigzag stitch and using the altered straight stitch for that purpose. Okay, but if you have a computerized machine, you have temporary altered memory, which means that the machine will remember what that stitch did the last time you were there while your machine has been turned on. Okay, so if you do your zigzag at one thing and you go to a straight stitch and you come back, your zigzag will be set up the same way it was set up when you used it last. If you have not watched our Bernina and Bernina Sewing Mastery series that are up on YouTube, even if you have maybe a machine that I don't specifically talk about, or a current machine, a lot of the techniques are the same. So if you maybe have an old 630 or a 640 or a 730, yeah, the screens aren't the same, but the icons are, and the techniques have not changed. Pattern end, pattern begin, knots, button sew on function, things along that lines are the same no matter where you are in the world and line of Bernina. So it can't hurt to watch that, but like I said, the screens aren't going to be the same. But if you look at the functions of like pattern repeat, pattern begin, mirror image, those are the same icons that you pretty much have on your machine. Okay, I know I have a 153, okay, at home, and for me, these icons, yeah, they're half circles, not triangles on my machine, but that 153 is like 19 years old, and it has all of these functions. They do the same thing, they're in a different location and they look different. It can't hurt. So if you are wanting to make sure that you're using your machine to the fullest or have questions and the manual just doesn't do it for you, it may help to take a look at those mastery series that I recorded at the beginning of 2020 for everyone. Okay, do I have any other questions? Because that is what I have for you today. That is the button sew on program with foot number 18 and all the things that you can do with it. And I am sure that you guys can find even more things that you could do with foot number 18. But I use it definitely for bows when I'm embellishing projects and kits. I'm trying to think. Like this project. Those buttons were sewn on by this machine. No need to do it by hand. If the bench pillow wasn't so far away, I'd go get it, but I hung it up this morning. Well, thank you everybody for joining me this morning. I hope that you have a great weekend, and we hope that you stay healthy and that we see you soon. And I'll see you for another Breakfast Club installment at the end of January here. We're going to take the next few months and cover all of the basics to quilting. So we're going to look at 1/4-inch seams. We're going to cover borders, binding, all those squaring up blocks, all that stuff. So that will be kind of the theme of the way that breakfast clubs are going to go. The first breakfast club of the month will be Bernina. We'll talk about the presser foot of the month, kind of show you how it's used. And then at the end of the month, we will cover a quilting sewing topic. But because it's the beginning of the year and everybody always wants to tackle those resolutions and learn something new, we're going to go back and start looking at how to perfect our seams, how to get our borders to be flat, our quilts to be flat, and things along that lines. So thank you everybody, and we hope to see you soon.